Over the past few weeks, 3 critical gateways connecting Crimea to southern Ukraine have come under growing pressure. Chongar, Henichesk, and Armyansk are no longer just bridges or transport routes. They are becoming part of a logistics battle that could directly affect Russia's ability to sustain forces across the entire southern front. Trucks are still moving, trains are still running. Crimea is still receiving fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. But modern war is not always decided by a massive explosion or a bridge collapsing in front of a camera. Sometimes change begins when every convoy is forced to take a longer route, when every supply shipment takes more time to reach its destination, when transport corridors are forced to operate under constant pressure from drones, missiles, and precision strikes. That is the picture gradually emerging around Crimea. While Russia is strengthening the peninsula with fortifications, minefields, air defenses, and coastal defense units, Ukraine appears to be focusing on a different objective: putting pressure on the roads, logistics hubs, and key links that keep the entire system functioning. And if those connections continue to be pulled into an increasingly dangerous environment, what happens first? Will Russia's logistics network adapt to the new pressure, or will Crimea gradually become harder than ever to sustain as a military stronghold? Let's take a closer look with military force. Ukraine is expanding the fight from the front line into the roads and bridges that keep Russia's southern war effort connected to Crimea. This is the first layer of the campaign, and it matters because logistics decides how long an army can keep moving, firing, repairing, and replacing losses. The focus is not only on one bridge or one dramatic strike. It is a wider pressure campaign against the network that links Crimea with Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Donetsk. Chongar, Henichesk, and Armyansk are important because they sit near the narrow approaches into the peninsula. For Russian forces, these routes are not just transport lines. They are the channels through which fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, medical supplies, and reserve units must pass before they can support operations farther north. That is why repeated pressure on these crossings can have a larger effect than the visible damage on the structure itself. A bridge may remain standing, but if Russian commanders believe it can be hit again, they must treat it as a risk. They may reduce traffic, move at night, split convoys into smaller groups, or shift supplies onto another road. Each choice sounds simple, yet each one creates delay. Delay can become a tactical problem when frontline units need shells, fuel, replacement vehicles, or evacuation support at a specific hour. The alternative routes are also part of the problem. When traffic is pushed away from the most direct crossings, it often moves through longer roads, narrower corridors, and fewer safe stopping points. That makes movement easier to watch and harder to hide. A convoy that once had several choices may be forced into predictable lanes. A repair truck or fuel tanker that takes a longer path may arrive late, or it may never reach the unit waiting for it. Kerch Bridge remains the most famous connection between Russia and Crimea, but it cannot solve every problem by itself. If the northern routes are placed under constant pressure, more burden can fall on Kerch and on the supporting rail and road system behind it. That does not mean Crimea is cut off. It means the system has to work harder under greater strain, while commanders must protect more traffic with fewer safe options. This is the main point of Ukraine's approach. Kyiv does not need to destroy every bridge at once to create pressure. It only needs to make Russia operate its southern logistics network with less confidence, less speed, and less room for error. From this point, the battlefield no longer sits only in trenches and villages. It stretches into every road, every crossing, and every supply movement heading toward Crimea. That is where this campaign begins to matter. Ukraine is turning Russia's southern supply route into a moving target, and the pressure now reaches beyond the line of contact. The route from Rostov through Mariupol, Melitopol, and toward Crimea is one of the main channels that keeps Russian forces supplied. Through this corridor, Moscow moves fuel, ammunition, repair equipment, vehicles, troops, and supplies. This route matters because southern operations depend on movement. Artillery needs shells before it can support infantry. Vehicles need fuel before they can shift positions. Damaged equipment needs recovery crews and spare parts before it can return to service. When these items arrive on schedule, a front can keep pressure. When they are delayed, the system slows. Ukraine's goal is not only to hit isolated vehicles. The broader aim is to make every movement along this corridor more uncertain. Reconnaissance drones are the first part of this pressure. They can watch roads, tree lines, rail areas, parking zones, and supply points from above. A convoy hidden from the ground may still be visible from the air because of dust, heat, tracks, or repeated movement patterns. Once a route is observed, Ukrainian operators can decide which target matters most. That target is not always the largest vehicle. A fuel truck can be more important than an armored carrier because it keeps other vehicles moving. An ammunition vehicle can be more valuable than a combat truck because it supports several firing positions. A command vehicle, repair truck, or supply point can also become a priority if destroying it creates confusion or delay. FPV drones are dangerous because they can strike specific vehicles with precision. They do not need to destroy an entire convoy to change the result. If one key truck burns, the vehicles behind it may stop, scatter, or turn back. Long-range drones expand this danger by pushing the threat deeper into areas Russia once treated as rear zones. The front line is no longer the only place where logistics can be interrupted. Storage sites, staging areas, repair parks, fuel depots, and transport hubs can also come under pressure if Ukraine can locate them. This creates a wider problem for Russian planners. Supplies must be gathered somewhere before they move forward. Vehicles must pause, refuel, load, unload, and form into groups. These moments are necessary for any army, but they also create patterns. A yard used too often becomes recognizable. A road used every night becomes predictable. Camouflage can still fail if vehicles keep arriving and leaving. Russia can respond by splitting convoys into smaller groups, moving at night, using camouflage, adding electronic warfare, or changing routes. Each method may reduce one danger, but it creates another cost. Smaller convoys require more trips. Night movement slows coordination. Detours consume fuel. Extra protection uses vehicles and crews needed elsewhere. This also forces commanders to choose between speed, secrecy, and protection, and they rarely get all three at the same time. Precision fire adds another layer to the problem. When reconnaissance identifies a target, Ukraine can use different tools depending on range, value, and timing. FPV drones may be used against moving vehicles near the contact line. Longer-range drones may reach deeper targets. Artillery or accurate fire can strike supply points if they fall within range. The method can change, but the purpose remains the same. That purpose is to damage the rhythm of the Russian war machine. A single destroyed truck is a local loss. A delayed fuel column is a wider problem. A damaged repair point can keep several vehicles out of combat. A hit on ammunition transport can reduce fire support for units under pressure. This is why Ukraine's campaign should be understood as a fight against timing and reliability. Russia may still move supplies toward Crimea, but it must do so with more caution, protection, and uncertainty. When logistics is watched continuously, it becomes clear. Ukraine is not only trying to destroy trucks, it is trying to make Crimea harder to feed from the outside. Ukraine's public message on Crimea is becoming clearer. The peninsula must be made harder for Russia to supply, defend, and use as a military base. This is why Ukrainian officials such as Mikhailo Fedorov and Robert Brovdi, known as Magyar, have placed drones at the center of the discussion. Their point is not only that drones can hit targets. Their larger message is that unmanned systems can help Ukraine pressure the entire Russian support network inside and around Crimea. This matters because Crimea is not only land, it is a military platform. Russia uses it for air defense, command, storage, naval activity, fuel movement, and support for operations in southern Ukraine. If those functions are disrupted one by one, the peninsula may remain occupied, but it becomes less useful and more costly to hold. The Ukrainian approach is built around connected pressure. Bridges are targeted to disturb movement. Fuel depots are targeted to slow vehicles, generators, ships, and aircraft. Air defense systems are targeted to open more space for drones. Command sites are targeted to slow decision-making. Ports and rail links are targeted because they support larger flows of equipment and supplies. This is different from a single strike designed only for headlines. The logic is systematic. If one part of the network is damaged, Russia can try to repair it. If several parts are hit over time, repairs become harder to organize. A damaged bridge creates a detour. A fuel shortage limits the value of that detour. A weakened radar network makes the next strike easier to plan. A command post under threat forces officers to move, hide, or reduce activity. That is why the language of isolation must be handled carefully. It does not mean Crimea is sealed off overnight. It does not mean every road, port, bridge, and rail line has stopped working. Russia still has routes, forces, air defense assets, engineering units, and political reasons to keep the peninsula operating. A stronger analysis should avoid claiming that collapse is already happening. The more accurate point is that Ukraine is trying to reduce Russia's freedom of action. If supply routes require more protection, if fuel must be stored farther away, if command centers must move more often, and if air defense units must defend more targets at once, then Crimea becomes harder to manage. It remains a base, but it no longer works with the same confidence. This also changes the political meaning of the campaign. For Kyiv, Crimea is not treated only as a future battlefield. It is treated as a system that can be weakened before any larger operation is even considered. This is why drone production, target selection, and long-range strike planning have become part of the same story. The goal is to make Russian control more fragile without needing to launch a direct assault immediately. For Moscow, the pressure creates a different problem. It must defend symbols, soldiers, roads, depots, airfields, ports, and radar sites at the same time. Protecting one area can leave another exposed. Moving supplies away from danger can make delivery slower. Concentrating defense around major assets can reveal which assets matter most. This is the strategic reason Western military analysts often begin any Crimea scenario with logistics. Before any discussion of a future ground operation, the first question is whether Russia can keep the peninsula supplied, coordinated, and protected under sustained pressure. Ukraine's leaders appear to understand that point. They are not only speaking about Crimea as territory, they are presenting it as a military system that can be strained until its value begins to decline. Western military analysts often describe Crimea through a simple rule. Before Ukraine can think about taking the peninsula back, Russia must first find it difficult to keep its forces there. This is the logic often associated with former U.S. Army Europe commander Ben Hodges. The point is not that a ground campaign is easy. The point is that any serious Crimea scenario begins with supply, protection, and command. A direct attack against a prepared fortress is one of the hardest operations in war. If the defender still has fuel, ammunition, air defense, reserves, engineers, and working communications, the attacking force pays a very high price. Crimea is exactly the kind of area where this warning matters. It has narrow approaches, prepared defensive belts, airfields, ports, radar sites, and political value for Moscow. The more realistic sequence begins before troops move toward the peninsula. First, the supply lines must be placed under pressure. Then, the air defense network must be weakened enough to open more space for drones and precision strikes. After that, Ukraine can continue targeting storage areas, command posts, ports, rail nodes, and airfields. Only when these layers are damaged over time can larger military or political options become more serious. Several locations explain why this logic matters. Jankoy is important because it links rail movement and military transport inside Crimea. Kerch remains vital because it connects Russia directly to the peninsula. Perekop matters because it is one of the narrow land gates from the north. The rail network matters because heavy supplies cannot be moved efficiently by trucks alone. If these points are stressed at the same time, Russia may still hold territory, but holding it becomes harder. A fortress does not fall only because its walls are hit. It falls when fuel does not arrive, when shells are rationed, when repair crews cannot reach damaged vehicles, and when commanders cannot move information quickly enough. This is why pressure on logistics can change the battlefield before any major offensive begins, because it weakens the defender's strength without requiring an immediate frontal attack. This is where the cost of Crimea becomes central. Russia has long used the peninsula as a military advantage, a base for aircraft, naval activity, storage, air defense, and pressure on southern Ukraine. Ukraine is trying to change that calculation. If Crimea needs more protection, more repairs, more fuel movement, and more emergency rerouting, then it stops being only a strategic asset. It becomes a drain on Russian planning. This does not mean a Ukrainian ground operation is near or certain. It means the conditions around Crimea are being shaped. Military planners rarely attack the strongest point first if they can weaken the system around it. Ukraine's campaign appears to follow that logic. The pressure on logistics, air defense, command, ports, and rail links is meant to reduce Russia's ability to manage the peninsula as a stable rear area. That pressure can accumulate gradually and still produce significant effects. As those support layers wear down, the next issue becomes more practical. Ukraine does not need to announce an immediate assault for Crimea to become more vulnerable. The important question becomes which routes, crossings, and pressure points could matter most if the balance begins to shift in the coming months. Ukraine's future options around Crimea would depend on whether the isolation campaign creates enough pressure on Russia's southern position. No route is simple, and no direction should be treated as certain. But several areas would become more important if Russian logistics, air defense, and command links continue to weaken. The first possible axis runs through Zaporizhzhia, Tokmak, and Melitopol. This is one of the most sensitive corridors in the war because it points toward Russia's land bridge to Crimea. That land bridge connects occupied parts of Donbass with southern Ukraine and the peninsula. If Ukraine could apply serious pressure along this axis, Russia would face a difficult problem. It would have to defend not only frontline positions, but also the connection that allows men, fuel, ammunition, and heavy equipment to move across the south. Tokmak and Melitopol matter because they sit along the route that supports this wider connection. A push in this area would not only be about taking ground, it would be about threatening the structure that links several Russian theaters together. Even limited pressure could force Moscow to move reserves, strengthen rear defenses, and protect more road and rail traffic. That would stretch the same forces already needed to defend Crimea, Donetsk, and the southern front. The second area is Perekop. This narrow gateway connects Crimea with the mainland from the north. Its geography gives defenders a clear advantage because attacking forces have limited room to maneuver. Minefields, artillery, drones, anti-tank obstacles, and prepared positions can make any movement extremely costly. For that reason, Perekop cannot be treated as an easy door into Crimea. At the same time, the same narrow geography can also become a weakness for Russia if its support system is under heavy strain. A gateway that is easy to defend can become a trap when supplies arrive late, when air defense is stretched, and when movement through the rear becomes less reliable. In that case, Perekop would not only be a defensive line, it would also become a pressure point. The third area is the Sivash region. This zone of shallow water, marshes, mud, and difficult ground is one of the most complex approaches near Crimea. It is not suitable for a large and simple armored advance. Weather, water level, visibility, engineering support, and Russian observation would all matter. Any operation here would carry serious risk. But difficult terrain can sometimes create opportunities for smaller forces. Special units, reconnaissance teams, or mobile groups might use unexpected routes if Russian defenses are distracted elsewhere. This would require excellent intelligence, careful timing, drone coverage, and fire support. Without those conditions, the terrain itself could become more dangerous than the enemy. These routes are not predictions. They are potential pressure points that could matter only if the wider campaign around Crimea reaches a stronger stage. Before any movement becomes realistic, Ukraine would need to keep weakening the systems that allow Russia to hold the peninsula. Still, every scenario faces one hard fact. Russia is turning Crimea into a dense defensive zone. Russia is reinforcing Crimea because Moscow understands that the peninsula is still one of the most important military prizes of the war. The defenses being built there are not symbolic. They are meant to slow, channel, and punish any Ukrainian move. The system includes trenches, minefields, concrete positions, anti-tank barriers, coastal defense units, radar sites, layered air defenses, and internal security forces. Systems such as Bastion and Bal add another layer along the coast, while garrison units and Rosgvardia protect facilities, roads, and rear areas. Together, these measures show that Russia is preparing for more than small raids or isolated drone attacks. But a fortress has a weakness if it must be supplied every day. Static defenses can stop movement, but they do not create fuel. Minefields can block an assault, but they cannot replace ammunition. Air defense batteries can protect selected targets, but they need missiles, radar support, trained crews, maintenance, and safe positions. Coastal missiles can threaten ships, but they still depend on communications, power, and logistics. This is where Ukraine's pressure becomes important. Kyiv is not only looking at the visible defensive line, it is trying to hit the layers that allow that line to function. Airfields are targeted because aircraft need runways, fuel, repair teams, and protected storage. Logistics depots are targeted because they hold the material that keeps units active. Air defense systems are targeted because every damaged radar or launcher can open a path for the next drone or missile. Ports and rail links also matter. If maritime facilities are disrupted, Russia has fewer ways to move heavy cargo. If rail movement is pressured, more responsibility shifts to trucks and roads. That creates more traffic, more exposure, and more demand for protection. A defense network that looks strong on a map can become harder to manage when its support routes are under repeated stress. This does not make Crimea easy to attack. Russia still has depth, positions, and major political reasons to hold the peninsula, but Ukraine is trying to change the cost of that defense. The goal is not only to break walls, it is to make the walls harder to feed, harder to protect, and harder to command. At this point, the strategy becomes clear. Ukraine does not have to seize Crimea immediately to change the military balance around it. It can first make Russia pay more to keep Crimea working. Ukraine's campaign around Crimea is becoming a layered effort to weaken the peninsula's military value before any larger move is considered. The focus is not one bridge, one convoy, or one fuel site. It is the wider system that allows Russia to use Crimea for logistics, air defense, naval activity, storage, and command. Crimea is not fully isolated, and Russia still has serious defensive strength there. But the direction of the war is changing around the peninsula. Crimea may not yet be the scene of a direct assault. It is already becoming the center of a long logistics siege. As always, our goal is not to celebrate war, but to understand it. By studying battles, weapons, logistics, and military strategy, we can better understand the human, political, and economic costs that every conflict creates. If you found this analysis useful, please like the video, subscribe to Military Force, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next report.